All right. Hello and welcome. This is Deciphering and Reproducing Old Documents. My name is Mindy Taylor. I'm an accredited genealogist professional specializing in the England region. I work for Price Genealogy. I do England and US research. I also work with the ICAP Gen study groups and the presentation committee. As genealogists, we know that our ability to solve really difficult research questions all stems from the clues that we can find in documents. And the best place to find those clues are in original documents. So if we don't have the ability to read and analyze those documents, then our ability to solve difficult research problems is kind of hindered. So being able to read old documents with fluency is a really critical skill for genealogists to have. So today we're going to be talking about paleography, which is the study of old handwriting, extraction, transcription, and abstraction. Here's the definition of paleography, which is the study and analysis of old handwriting in order to read documents with accuracy and fluency. There are two really essential things to paleography, and the first one is you have to know the alphabetical characters in different hands, which are handwriting styles. So just knowing the alphabets in different handwriting styles. You also need to know how to interpret abbreviations, which were unique throughout time to different handwriting styles and different situations. It's also really helpful to know the meaning of words that have fallen out of use. And I highly recommend the Oxford English Dictionary, which will have archaic spellings of words and also obsolete words. So that's a good place to find things that you come across that you don't know what they mean. Also, it's really good to know some phrases in certain contexts, such as legal documents, that can help you as you're looking at certain documents understand what they're saying. Also, understanding the history of the document itself and some cultural practices around that document. For example, guardianship or probate or even marriage practices. So learning a little bit about that can also help you understand the document. All right, moving on to that first essential piece of paleography, which is the alphabetical characters. I'm going to I'll give you a little bit of a history lesson here. History is really complicated, and so this is really simplified, of course, but this will kind of give you a feel for where some of the things come from that we see in old documents. So back in the 5th century, the English language was first written in Anglo-Saxon Futhoric Runes, and it was brought to England with the Anglo-Saxon settlers. This is a chart that shows Futhoric Runes. And then in the 7th century, the Latin alphabet was introduced by Christian missionaries, and it began to replace the Anglo-Saxon Futhoric runes, but the two continued together for some time. I want you just to kind of imagine you've got these Christian missionaries, they come and they start learning the English language, but they're writing that language with their Latin alphabet. And because they're using Latin letters, there's some sounds that are in the English language that they cannot represent. And so they take some of these Futhoric runes and use them to represent the sounds, or they just take the sound and give it their own symbol. So here's that chart again of the Futhoric runes. And I want you to see the two at the top that I have circled. One is the thorn and one is win, and both of those were taken and just put right in with the Latin letters as part of the alphabet. And then down at the bottom in squares, I have circled in red, Ethel and Ash. So these are all things that came from Futhoric runes. So in Old and Middle English, there are 6 non-Latin letters. The first one there at the top is Ash, and ash is a short vowel somewhere between A and E, like in cat. So, like I said, more complicated than I can probably explain, but that's just kind of what I've been able to learn. Ethel is somewhere between O and E, and kind of started as oi, but it turned out much more along the lines of the long E, and pretty much just disappeared from the language pretty early and was replaced by E. Win is the consonant W, and that was a sound that the Latin alphabet didn't represent at all. And so the W sound disappeared, the win disappeared when they started writing two U's next to each other to represent that same sound. And it ultimately developed into the modern W, but not until like 1700. So you may see two U's next to each other, and eventually you'll see a W. All right, the next three letters are the F, which is the consonant TH sound, and it sounds like this and them, and it's voiced. You can hear your vocal cords vibrate when you say those. And thorn was the consonant TH, as in thing or thought, and it's voiceless, so your vocal cords are not vibrating when you say it. And those two were very similar sounds. And then you have the last one, which was yog, and it's a Middle English letter from an Old English G, and it represented various forms of the letter G. It sounds somewhat like lock, the CH in lock or bach, the throaty sound, and it was replaced by GH. All right, F and thorn, as I was saying, were very, very similar in sound. And so F was replaced by thorn pretty early on, and it thorn continued in existence for a really long time. Its lowercase form gradually became indistinguishable from the lowercase y in a lot of handwriting. So now we just use TH, but back in the day, you may have seen ye old bookshop, but it's not ye, it's the old bookshop, because that Y represents the thorn, which makes the sound TH. It never made the sound Y. All right, the Old English alphabet then in 1011 was written down by a monk named Bertfirth, and he recorded the traditional order, which is 24 Latin letters, including the ampersand, which is the Latin symbol for and, 4 English letters, and the Tyronian note ond, which looks like the number 7, and it's a symbol for and as well. So that was just kind of a shorthand note that was created by Tyro. So here's that alphabet. You can see the 23 alphabetical letters, ampersand, the Tyronian note, win, thorn, eth, and ash. And so you can also see that the Old English alphabet did not include J, U, or W, and that continued for quite a while. All right, I want to talk a little bit about the ampersand, and the name of the ampersand is pretty recent. It actually stands for et, which is the Latin word for and they gave it a symbol. It was considered the 27th letter of the alphabet until the late 1800s. And it was taught to children in the US and elsewhere. They would sing an alphabet song to teach the children, and I don't know the tune, so I'm not going to sing it for you. But at the end of the song, it would say W, X, Y, Z, and per se, and. Per se means by itself or in itself. And because they couldn't say and it just didn't make any sense. And so that last little bit merged together into ampersand, and that is the name that stuck, which is so interesting. Even after we quit teaching that song, using that song to teach the alphabet, that's what we called the ampersand. All right, as far as punctuation goes, in most old documents, you don't see a whole lot of punctuation. The printing press was introduced into England in 1476 by William Caxton, and that kind of promoted a necessity for stops and pauses to kind of guide readers. So that's where a colon and a full point kind of came in, the full point being the period. And then over a process of time, they added a comma that looked more like just a perpendicular line. And eventually a semicolon was added. So they had like the colon, which was the longest pause, the semicolon, which was the medium-sized pause, and the comma was just the shortest pause. And question marks and exclamation marks came quite a bit later. I don't think I've ever even seen an exclamation mark or a question mark in a genealogical document, so I'm not going to worry about those too much. Spelling is also a really recent invention. Samuel Johnson produced a dictionary in England in 1755, and in the US, Noah Webster put together the American Dictionary of the English Language in 1828. But as anything else, just because people had a dictionary doesn't mean that they understood how to spell, or that it was widely taught. Not until children were required to go to school did spelling and things like that, punctuation, that they were widely enough taught that people learned how to spell things. So spelling tended to be somewhat phonetic and very creative. There weren't like a whole lot of set standards. So don't feel like your ancestors or people were doing it wrong. They were just putting down what they heard or how they felt it should be spelled. And in some ways, that's kind of a creative writing style. All right, now we're going to get into English handwriting styles. There are a lot of difficulties when you try to date documents by handwriting styles. The styles were around for hundreds of years. Each one kind of overlapped each other, and at the beginning, things were always taught by being passed down from one generation to the next, and so a lot of the older styles were being passed down, and newer styles were harder to implement, I guess. So things kind of overlap, and also you have to remember that even today, everybody's handwriting style is different. And so they might be a messy handwriter, or they might be really precise, and it all just kind of depends on what their style was and also how they learned to write. All right, this is a timeline, just a basic timeline. Of course, these are not definitive times. They, like I said, overlapped and extended into one another. So, but these are kind of general guidelines for when these different styles of handwriting were around. So we have the book hand, which is from 1100 to 1500. The court hand, which is 1300 to 1700. Secretary hand from 14 to 1800, and they were mostly obsolete by 1750. The Italic hand, which is from about 1500 to 1800, and then the round hand, which was around since about the 1800s. The book hand is gorgeous. It is really gorgeous, and it comes in a lot of different variations, and we're not going to talk about it because it was mostly used for books, and you just won't see it in documents. And by the time 1500 rolls around, genealogical documents don't usually go back that far. So this hand, even though it is gorgeous, I've given you a website to go check out so you can see some different pictures of it and learn more about it, but it's just not really applicable to genealogy. The court hand was around between 1300 and 1700, and it was created for legal and administrative purposes, speed and efficiency in writing. So where the book hands were very artistic, this one was more for efficiency. Different courts developed their own styles. So you might see the exchequer hand or the chancery hand, and those are different courts in England. And to complicate matters quite a bit, most of the time the court hand will be written in Latin. So the court hand you might run into if you're getting really deep into court documents, but it's a difficult one. So I've just put one example. Like I said, they vary from different courts. This is kind of a general way that it looked. Court hand got to the point in the 17th and 18th centuries that it became so stylized and heavily abbreviated that most people couldn't read it unless they were familiar with all the conventions that were being used. So the court hand was banned from English law courts in 1731. So from the 25th of March, 1733, court proceedings had to be written in English, not Latin, and in a common legible hand and not abbreviated. Hallelujah. So if you come across documents that are 1733 or more recent, you will see them in English, which is much, much easier for us to read. One point that I do want to make, though, is that most probate records, wills themselves, were still written in English. So until you get pretty far back, you will still see wills in English, which is very, very good for genealogists. That makes it a lot easier for us to read them. So because court hand is so difficult, I recommend a book called Court Hand Restored by Andrew Wright. And this is a link to a digital copy of it. So you can just go and read it online. And it's one of those hands that you'd have to learn a lot more about if you're going to get deep into court records. You'd also need some Latin word lists, and if you just need something really basic to get familiar with Latin, there's an article by Kimberly Powell that I've given a link here, and all of this is in the syllabus too, so you can just download the syllabus and all this information's there. And then there's a couple Latin word lists on Family Search that you can try and pick apart the Latin in documents. All right, probably the most important hand to learn as a genealogist is the secretary hand. And the secretary hand was between 1400 and 1800. And so it covers the period where most genealogists are going to be able to find documents, but it's also very unique. And so it takes a little bit of learning, but it's also written in English. So that makes it a little bit easier than court hand because you don't need to learn Latin. It was mostly obsolete by 1750, and it was imported from France and Italy and used by copyists and secretaries and clerks. That's where this name comes, secretary hand. And like I said, the letter forms are somewhat unfamiliar to us, to most readers, and so it takes a little bit of learning this alphabet in order to read it. So here's an example of secretary hand. And if you look at this, I would say, there's definitely some familiar letters in there. You can recognize the A and the B. Some of these, I think, are the most difficult are the capital letters, because some of them, when you come across them in a document, you have no idea what that even is. So the capital letters are definitely difficult. There are 24 letters because the U and V are recorded as kind of the same letters. They're used interchangeable. And I and J, like J wasn't a letter yet, even though you might see it at the end of a Roman numeral or something. And then there's a lot of unfamiliar letter forms in this. Like I said, the capital letters, they're really tough. But the lowercase letters that are really tricky are H, E, C, R, and S. So I just wanted to kind of go over the really hard ones, and maybe that'll help you get a little familiar. The H is really unique because it has both an ascender and a descender. So it goes up and it also goes down with a big flourish. And when you put that with other letters, it makes it kind of hard to read it. And we'll have an example over there by the S in just a minute. We'll get there. The E, if that little circle on the top was closed, would look somewhat like a letter E, and it wouldn't be probably as difficult to read, but it isn't closed most of the time. It just looks like two little half circles. So it doesn't come off as familiar in a document as we'd like it to. A C is really tricky. It looks kind of like a T or an R, a little R. And so that one can throw you quite a bit. The R looks like a W, and when you combine that with other letters, sometimes it looks like a U, sometimes it's just confusing sometimes. So that's a tough one. And then the S has two different forms because you have the long S, which happens in the middle of words, and then you have a final S, which can be those two different ends there, and that's really a unique shape for S. And when you combine S, like that little end example, with an H, you're not really sure if that's a capital letter or what. It is very confusing when it's combined with an SH. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the long S. It was derived from an old Roman cursive S that happened in the middle of words, and it looks kind of like a lowercase f. It lasted until the early 19th century. You're going to see this in print, and we transcribe it just as a regular S. So in the examples below, I've got Paradise Lost, and that's in print, and you can see those S's that look like F's. Then the next two examples are when there's two S's in a row, but the first one is the long S, and then the second one is the regular ending S. The very last example there, it looks like two lowercase p's, but that's actually two long S's in the middle of a word next to each other. So the second S isn't written like a regular S because both of those S's are in the middle of a word. So kind of some different circumstances for our S's to learn. The other thing I want to make you aware of is the two lowercase f's next to each other. In the secretary hand, those two lowercase f's next to each other is actually the form of a capital letter F. And so when you see those at the beginning of a word, that's actually a capital letter F. And generally, it's been taught that when you transcribe that, you would just make it a capital letter F because that's what it is. And that makes a lot of sense, but you could also leave it as two lowercase f's if you're doing a diplomatic transcription, because in diplomatic transcriptions, we want to see exactly what the document looks like. We are trying to represent exactly how we see it. So there is an argument for both cases here, whether you use a capital F or whether you use the two lowercase f's. It could also be said that those two lowercase f's kind of give you a clue from that document that it's from a certain time period or a handwriting style. So you could argue either way on that one. So here's some really great website helps for English for the secretary hand. There's a really great article by Catherine James. It just was put up in August of 2020, and it is a fabulous guide to the basics of English secretary hand. It's really, really good. I really love it. And I think the reason why I love it is because it's visual. She explains things and then shows you a picture, which is very, very helpful. You can also see the secretary hand alphabet and abbreviations at the Bodleian Libraries website. And then there's also a FamilySearch.org wiki article on secretary hand, and they have a chart of a bunch of different forms of the secretary hand letters that might be really helpful for you. All right. Now we're moving on to the Italic Hand, and that was around from about 1500 to 1800. It was the most common style from 1700 because it was a lot easier to write than secretary hand. It's called italic not because the letters are slanted, but because it came from Italy. So it was Italian writing influencing English writing. It's very similar to the round hand, which is very familiar to us and what we kind of learned in elementary school when we were learning to write cursive. U and V are still used interchangeably, and you can still see that long S that looks like the lowercase f. This is kind of an example of the italic hand, and you can see in those capital letters down there, there's no U, there's no W, and there's no J. But in the lowercase letters, you can see some different forms of the U and V that look like U or V. In that last letter where it says unskillfulness, you can see that the U looks much more like a V, and you can see all those long S's right alongside the regular S. So just be aware that that is going to happen in italic hand still, even though it's more familiar. Then we've got the round hand that has been around since the 1800s. It's really familiar for us to read. The letters are joined together like American cursive writing, and this is an example. And when I look at this, I'm like, yeah, I know what that looks like. I can figure that one out. That's not hard at all. There's a W, there's a U, there's a J. You know, I can cope with that one. So when you run into that one, it won't be hard at all to read it. All right, if you're struggling trying to read a document because those alphabet characters are so unique, try learning how to write the letters because it will help your brain see the strokes, and that can be really helpful when you're trying to read it. Remember back to your elementary school days that there was a baseline, a midline, an ascender, and a descender, and certain letters have ascenders and certain letters have descenders. So if you're looking at a document, you're having a really hard time figuring out what that letter might be, consider, does it have an ascender or a descender? Or like H, could it have both? And then also, sometimes the person recording this information did not dot their I's, so consider that. That might make it more complicated to tell if it's an I or a U or something else. All right, so here's some fabulous paleography tutorials that will help you practice. There's one at BYU Script tutorial, English Handwriting Online from 1500 to 1700, and the National Archive Paleography from 1500 to 1800, and that's the English National Archive. And all of these have documents that you can practice with, and it's a really helpful way to learn because you're not going to learn it if you don't give some practice time. So there's a good place to go. All right, now we're getting to the second essential part, which is interpreting abbreviations. Abbreviations in old handwriting come in a bunch of different ways. There's shortened words that either have a period or don't have a period, and those are pretty familiar to us. We're used to seeing that. Then there's the superscript, a brevigraph, or a line or a tilde above a letter or a portion of the word where they have removed letters. So we're going to start with the easier one, the shortened word or the period. And here's some examples. MR period, which means master back in the day. We've kind of changed it to mean Mr., but it used to be master. Gent for gentleman, ESQR for esquire, surrogate, SURR period, and then I've got some examples in old handwriting over there of gent and surrogate. One shortened word with a period that I want you to be familiar with because you will see it and you will have no idea what that means if you're not familiar with it, is viz. So it's V-I-Z period. It stands for videlicet, which is list to follow, namely, that is to say, to wit, or as follows. And I've got two examples down here in old handwriting. The first one is a list to follow. It says children viz, James, Thomas, and Elizabeth. So it's a cluing you in that I'm going to give you a list now. In the next example, it is from a will, and this is an example of as follows. So the person writing this will is giving instructions of how to give his money. He says the remainder of the 45 pounds, viz, or as to follow, 10 pounds I give unto his son, Lawrence Ainsworth, my nephew. So those are two examples of how you might see viz. All right, then we have superscripts. Superscripts are at the end of a word usually, where they just raise the last letter up to indicate that they have removed some letters beforehand. So we've got January, Margaret, William, and Sir, and I put an example of old handwriting of Sir. So it's a capital S with an R, superscript. All right, brevigraphs are symbols, basically, that take the place of 2 or 3 letters and kind of just made it shorter, I guess, for people to write. So the first one is and or ampersand, which we've already talked about. The next one is C at the end of a word, and it is an ES, IS, or YS plural ending. So if you see kind of this flourish at the end of a word, then that could be the plural ending. If you put ampersand with a C, that's etc. And it means and others, and it's not used to indicate a list of things. Oh, it is used to indicate a list of things. That's not exhaustive. So in old handwriting, it kind of looks like a C with a big squiggly. We've also got brevigraphs for thorn, which we've already talked about, and I've got 2 examples there of the and that. So the Y with an E superscript or the Y with a T superscript. Christ was also a brevigraph that they used X for. So that is where Christmas, Xmas comes from. You might also see it in church registers for christenings, X and then christenings. All right, a capital B kind of looks like a capital B. It wasn't a capital B, but it kind of looks like a B. It is the prefix for Sir in all different forms, S-U-R, S-I-R, S-E-R. All right, and then there's also brevigraph P for per, par, pro, and pre, but they got really tricky. The different brevigraphs depend on how the bottom part of the P is formed. So if it extends down and crosses back over in a horizontal stroke, then that's per or par. It's pro if it goes down to the left and loops back towards or across the stem. And I've got some visual examples so you can kind of see what I'm saying. And then pre is the easy one because it's just P with a superscript R. If you see a line or a tilde above the word that you're reading, it usually means it's been abbreviated. So we've got deceased, D-E-C with an E and a line above it, and a D, and it's telling us they've removed those letters in between. Then we've got Anno Domini, which you will see, in dates, of course. It's AD, which means year of the Lord or year of our Lord. And in this case, Anno is a superscript, and Domini has the tilde above it. And you might see it written this way or with a straight line. It just depends on the handwriting style and who's writing it. This is a list of some of the most common abbreviations that you will see. We've already talked about and the and that. There's also your and which and what and with, item and ditto. Item you will see in probate wills a lot. They just remove the E. And that's example from a will. And then ditto you'll see in passenger lists and on census records and all kinds of documents. It just means we're copying the same information down from the line above. All right, some really great places to learn abbreviations or to see lists of common abbreviations. The Folger Shakespeare Library has the early modern manuscripts online, and it has a fabulous list of abbreviations. The Bodleian Library's Secretary Hand abbreviations are at this website that I've listed here. Again, all this is in the syllabus. A few things we said might be good to know are some cultural things. So things like numbers, dates, and money. In English, a lot of the numbers are just going to be what we're used to seeing because we speak English. But early on, they did use Roman numerals. So you may see, like that example for the Roman numeral 3, an IIJ, because at the end of their Roman numerals, they'd usually put a longer stem on the I to say this is the end. But just look up a good Roman numerals table and that will help you figure those out. Also, dates, you're mostly going to see things that you recognize, that you're familiar with, but every now and then they'll throw in regnal years, which are calculated from the official date, which is the year, month, and day of a monarch's accession. So I put an example here, and it says dated the 13th day of January in the 15th year of the reign of our sovereign Lord George II. So that's the regnal year. Luckily, in this document, they also give us the normal dating that we're used to. So if you need to know exactly what that date is, just Google regnal year calculators and they have them. So you can just plug in what it says and you can find out the real date. If you are transcribing this though, you do not change it. You're going to leave it exactly as it is because it's a clue and we don't want to change our clues. Another thing to be aware of with dates was that in 1752, the Julian calendar was replaced by the Gregorian calendar. And so the beginning of the year changed from March 25th to January 1st. So if you are looking at a date system that says day, month, year, and the month is represented as a number, then the first month of the year was March before 1752. The way that I remember that is that in Latin, you've got 7 is septem, 8 is octo, 9 is novum, and 10 is decem. And all of those are the names of the last 4 months. So September, October, November, December. So if you just remember December was the 10th month, then January would be the 11th and February would be the 12th. So hopefully that's helpful. In English money, they had pounds, shillings, and pence, and you'll see them represented with colons in between them as pounds, shilling, and pence. In the US, most of the money was commodity trading. They also tried at several different times to print paper money, and it failed. So there may be state money, there may be the Continental Congress money, and you may have to do some research to figure out in the time period in that document what they're talking about. But just be aware that coins in the US were mostly Spanish, and so that is why US money is based on the dollar and not on the pound. All right, moving on to reproducing old documents. Phew. Okay, so we finished paleography and we're going to get into extraction, transcription, and abstraction. We're going to start with the easy one. This is my favorite. Extraction is an exact copy of a select piece of a document. You copy the information exactly as it appears on the document, and then you use quotation marks. So simple. So here's an example of extraction. This is a parish register, and all I want is the baptism for Elizabeth. So I copy it as Elizabeth, the daughter of Elizabeth Room, was baptized February 19th, 1737. I put quotation marks around it, and I am done. Okay, so that is an extraction. It's an exact copy, but it's usually just a small piece. Transcription is an exact copy of a full document with all the original grammar, punctuation, spelling, abbreviations, notes, and marks. copied as faithfully as possible in a handwritten or a typed format. So basically, our goal in a transcription is to copy the document exactly as we see it. There are two different conventions that I want you to be aware of. There is diplomatic and there is semi-diplomatic. The diplomatic convention is a faithful reproduction of the original document, including spelling, punctuation, lineation, superscripts, and abbreviations rendered as closely as typographically possible. So when you see a U or a V, you don't change it to seem more correct. You just put in exactly what you see. Same with the INJ, same with the lowercase double f. And we talked about that, how you may feel like that you could use a capital F. That's fine. I'm not going to argue with anybody, but if you're doing a diplomatic transcription, you're trying to get it to look visually as close to the original as possible. So you're also going to reproduce the superscripts, the abbreviations as they are represented, and Thorn is going to be transcribed as Y. In a semi-diplomatic, you're doing exactly the same thing as a diplomatic, so you're going to transcribe it as close as possible to the original, but the semi-diplomatic allows you to expand contractions and lower the superscripts. And this one is used the most for scholarly transcriptions. You'll see this used with the Paleography tutorials. It's a lot more searchable, and also for readability for clients, etc. So brevigraphs then in this will be replaced with the modern equivalent. So example, Y would be transcribed as TH. You have to be really careful using some semi-diplomatic. I think it's maybe a little harder than just plain diplomatic, because with diplomatic, you're writing exactly what you see. With semi-diplomatic, you could make a mistake when you change the, when you expand the abbreviations or change the superscripts. So be very, very careful. Here's an example where MAR with the superscript Y is actually the abbreviation for Marjorie. And if you don't know that, you might put Mary, and that could change the name of the person. So this is kind of where you have to learn your abbreviations really well and be careful. Another way you can be really careful is if you italicize or put square brackets around the portion of the word that you added. That way it's much more clear that this is what has been done. All right, so if you're asking yourself, well, which convention do I use? I can just give you my opinion and what I do. If there is a need to create a transcript, so for example, I'm in an archive, I only have a piece of paper and a pencil, and I can only copy this document by hand. I can't get a digital photo of it. I am going to do a diplomatic transcription. I'm going to make it look as exact as I possibly can. Then I can always change it to semi-diplomatic as I need to later. For me, personally, I think a transcript is best as diplomatic. And then if you need to move to semi-diplomatic, it's pretty easy. And also you could use semi-diplomatic in an abstract in your client report or for scholarly writing, because it's a little bit more readable and more friendly. So if there's a need to make a transcript, then chances are making it the full diplomatic transcript is your best bet if you're never going to see it. If you have a digital image of it already, then you could just move right into the semi-diplomatic without any problem, because you can always go back, right? All right. So if you want to learn a little bit more about conventions, semi-diplomatic ones are on English Handwriting Online and BYU Script Tutorial. Also, the Early Modern Manuscripts Online is a fabulous website. I want you to go check it out. This is what it looks like. They have taken a bunch of early modern manuscripts, letters, recipes, some really cool documents, and they have done diplomatic, semi-diplomatic, and then they have modernized or regularized them so that you can see the 3 different formats and the old document at the same time. So it's really, really helpful if you're trying to learn how to transcribe. You can go and see it done in several different ways. Very, very helpful. All right, so creating a transcript, there are some rules. The first thing that I would do is read through the entire document first, and that just helps you get a little bit of context. What kind of document am I dealing with, and what is it trying to say? And then I note the words that I can really easily recognize. That will help me figure out the harder words as I go along. The very first thing before you start typing, turn off your spell check and your grammar autocorrect. You will be so frustrated as you're typing. It will change everything that you are seeing in a document incorrect. It will correct it, and you'll have to go back and fix it. So turn it off. The general rules are you always put a source citation at the top of the page. You want to keep the line length and the page format the same as the original document if at all possible. In a document that is a form, so you've got part of it printed and the other part handwritten, you could italicize the handwritten information. If you do that, just put a note right under your source citation. Handwritten portions are in italics, okay? In client reports, a short transcription or extract should be in quotation marks. If it's really long, then you just do an indented paragraph. A note at the top, like we said about, putting the handwritten parts in italics, can be put at the top. Or if there's some kind of a comment or correction or interpretation or clarification that you need to, you could possibly use footnotes. Square brackets are used to indicate something that is not in the original text. It kind of signals that there was an issue with legibility and that you added it. You want to keep those simple. You don't want to put big comments in there. But here's some examples of what you could do if you're reading along and there is a word there, but you cannot read it. You're just not sure about it. Then you can put a question mark in square brackets. If you look down on number 3, if you do kind of feel like these are the letters that are missing, but you're not sure, you could put the letters and a question mark. If it's just really illegible and you can't read it, then you can put illegible in square brackets, or tell us how many words are illegible, or the whole paragraph is illegible for things that you just can't read. And if you do know the letters that should be there, but it's too mangled for you to read, then you can put them in square brackets down there on number 4. All right, curly brackets are used to indicate something that is missing. So it's like torn out, or there's an ink blot. It's too damaged to read it. All right, so this is how you would represent curly brackets. You just put some space in between there, or you can put torn or ink blot. If you know the letters that should be there, but they are missing, they're not there, then you could put them in curly brackets. Sic is a Latin term for so thus, and with transcripts, you don't really need to use them. The whole concept of a transcript is that you're copying something exactly as it is. You're intentionally leaving it exactly as the original. So if you do need to use sic in a transcription, don't use it for just, misspelled words and things like that. Otherwise, you'll be using it every other word. But just use it when there's an actual error. All right, if you're struggling with handwriting, compare the letters in the same document to each other. Also use the context of what's being said. Sometimes your eye will recognize a word, and if you analyze it too much, like the letters just don't make sense to you. So kind of gloss over it a little bit and see if you can't get the context of what's being said. You can also use handwriting alphabet samples, and I've given you lots of great websites and places where you can find these. If you have text in the transcript or in the original document that's underlined, crossed out, or inserted, you want to put that into the transcript just as it's presented. If you can't accurately represent that, use square brackets or put it in a note of some kind. Superscripts and crossed out text can be represented within your word processor. You can either type the word and then highlight the portion that you want superscript or struck through. And then you can find that at Format, Font, choose Superscript or Strike Through. Or on your little toolbar, you have a box that has ABC with a line through it, or an A with a superscript too. So as you're typing along, you can do, will, and then you can click that button and it will put the rest of the letters superscript. You click the button again and it will go back to regular type. So that's how you do it on a word processor, just in case you didn't know. All right, diacritical marks are also tricky to find sometimes in your word processor. You go to Insert, Advanced Symbol, and choose the letter that has the applicable mark of what you're trying to copy. So again, you're trying to just represent what you see. There are like 11 different types of marks over a bunch of different of the letters of the alphabet. So hopefully in that advanced symbol area, you'll be able to find what you're looking for. All right, punctuation marks, like we said before, there isn't a whole lot for quite a while of punctuation marks, but these are some of the things that you might see. Stop is a period, pause are like a colon, semicolon, and a comma. Commas, like we had talked about, could be a perpendicular line or just a regular comma like we're used to seeing. A slash mark can be used for a period. A dash can be used as a period. There are many documents I've come across that have like a long dash just to fill in some space between letters or at the end of a line. And then you'll see a double-lined hyphen to break words at the end of a line. So it looks like our equal sign, but it actually means I'm continuing this word on the next line. So just include those as you see them. Seals, you just draw those in wherever they are if you're doing it in handwriting. If not, just type the word seal wherever it was on the page. Best you can locate it there on the page. Dates, you just transcribe it exactly as you see them, and you don't interpret them from the old style. You don't change them at all. Just say just exactly what is there. When you transcribe the letters U and V and I and J, just write what you see. Put U, even if you think it's supposed to say unto and it's using a V, put a V. And again, the J, it wasn't very popular. It wasn't used much until 1700. So you may see it in Roman numerals, but for the most part, if you see a letter, it's probably an I, not a J. All right, now we're moving on to abstraction. An abstract is just an abbreviated copy of that full document, and it records just the important details. We're going to remove excess wording like boilerplate language. Boilerplate language is a unit of writing used in legal documents that can be reused over and over again without change. So the best way to learn boilerplate is to take your document and look at the document before it and after it if you're looking on microfilm, for example, or if you're looking in a book or something like that. Look at the documents that are before or after it, and you can see the repeated phrases, the things that are not unique. Those are boilerplate. Also, you can check out the Black's Law Dictionary, which has all of the standard language of the law. So if you can't find something, you don't know if it's boilerplate, check out Black's Law Dictionary. All right, abstraction uses. What do we use an abstract for? Well, if we don't have time to transcribe something and we just want the relevant information, that's one way. For readability, for your client or something like that, you might just put it in your research notes. That may be all that you need, is just the important information to put in your research notes. And also when an extract is not practical, and here's an example of when an extract just isn't really all that practical. This is a marriage form, and I just need to record the information about the marriage, but if I did an extract, I would have to somehow represent all of these column heads, all these column titles. So instead, I just keep the information in the same order that it appears in the document, but I just record the important information. Like the marriage was solemnized in Cheltenham, Gloucester, 30th of November, 1845, George Brabant and Anne Hope. So these are the people being married and this is the date. So I'm just taking out that information without having to reproduce the whole form. All right, general abstraction rules. Again, always include a citation at the top of the document. Preserve the exact arrangement of the data, use the same language and tense, copy names and dates exactly, include anything that is described or traceable, land, possessions, things like that. Keep that in place. We're just removing the boilerplate, the stuff that isn't applicable. So we want to keep everything that's important. We want to reproduce the signatures and the signature marks as faithfully as we can. There are a couple old styles you might see in old abstracts. Before they had word processors, their typewriters could only do lowercase and uppercase. And if they wanted to set the names apart, then they would capitalize the name so you could see it. It kind of goes against the rule of copying names exactly as you see them. It can change the subtlety in some spelling of some names. So nowadays, I just highly recommend just bold it. If you want those names to stand out in your abstract, just use the bold function. Also, you might see in old abstracts a lot of abbreviated words. It was because they were trying to do shorthand or copy something right there at the archive. It's really not necessary now. We have digital cameras and we have learned also that abbreviations don't really save you space so much. And they also change the meaning of those clues in your document. So you kind of risk changing all those important things if you're abbreviating. So just avoid that now. You don't really need to do that. Now to get here to the end, we're going to show you the process of creating an abstract of a full document. So first you start with the original document. This one, lucky for me, I don't know, I just chose it because it seemed like an easy way to show you boilerplate. But if it's a form and it's printed like this, then the parts that are the form are boilerplate generally. Okay, so I transcribed this full document. I put a source citation at the top. I also put a note saying that I put the form letters in bold and the other parts in italics so that you can see the difference. Then I go through and I remove the excess wording. So I'm highlighting the things that can be removed and not change the meaning of the words in the document or the information that I'm trying to pull out. So you can see that there is one portion of the boilerplate that I left in because that needed to be said in my abstract. I needed it to make sense of what I had left in. So this is where I review all the remaining text. Now I could leave it just like this. This is an abstract. It has all of the information that I need from that document. I could also take it a step farther where I take all of the abbreviations and expand them, remove the superscripts, etc. I can also just put it into a paragraph format. So it's a little bit easier or more familiar to read, or maybe it just doesn't take up as much space, whatever it is. So that is the process of creating an abstract. I hope that that is helpful for you when you are reproducing documents to be familiar with those different things. So just in the end here, deciphering and reproducing old documents can really be key to finding the clues that genealogists need. So learning these skills and practicing these skills is really important. And I've given you a ton of resources. I hope you'll go home and read and practice and kind of go through this skill and get better and better at it so that your genealogy methodology can also get better. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. If you have questions, this is my email. Feel free to reach out to me. Also, feel free to go check out all of the other great content on the Roots Tech Connect website. I've really enjoyed doing this presentation. I've learned a lot, and I hope that you learn a lot too. Thank you.